Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're cracking open a stack of sources you've provided to take a deep dive into the history and evolution of a really fascinating place, Parachute, Colorado.
Yeah, our mission here is to pull out the most important insights, maybe some surprising details from this material, and guide you through the unique story of this town.
And it really is a story that feels, classically Western,
Hmm.
shaped by its location on Colorado's western slope, right along the Colorado River and I-70.
Mm-hmm.
Parachute's path has been just profoundly influenced by its landscape and maybe most importantly, the resources hidden beneath it, particularly oil shale.
But the sources make it clear pretty quickly this isn't just about geography. It's really a narrative defined by incredible economic volatility. We're talking intense booms that reshape the place almost overnight,
Yeah.
followed by these devastating, really painful busts.
Right. So we're going to journey from its earliest days and that surprisingly complicated story behind its name.
Which is pretty interesting, yeah.
Through those wild, resource-driven periods, look at the lasting impacts on its physical shape and community life and see how it's trying to adapt to build a different kind of future today.
Okay, sounds good. Let's unpack this story.
So where does the story really begin? Parachutes in Garfield County. Long before settlers arrived, this was Ute Indian land.
Right. The sources mentioned the area, especially around Battlement Mesa, was like a seasonal campground for the Ute people.
Okay.
And what's interesting is the Ute already saw the valley's natural advantages.
Yeah.
A relatively moderate climate, good for things like ranching, farming.
The same things that drew settlers later.
Exactly. The Ute held this land by treaty until they were removed in 1880. That was after the Meeker Massacre the year before. And that's when really the main wave of European settlement kicked off.
And the town itself, Parachute, it took shape pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, settled in 1882, officially founded just a year later, 1883, by a guy named J.B. Hurlburt.
Okay, now, about that name Parachute. This is where it gets kind of fun, because the sources give us a couple of different, pretty compelling origin stories.
It does. One theory is just visual. The Hayden Survey explorers back in 1879 apparently looked at how the feeder canyons dropped off the Rhone Plateau and described them as having a parachute-like appearance. Just how they looked.
So literally, the land looked like parachutes from certain angles, but there's another layer too, right, involving the Ute language.
Yeah, and this seems pretty significant too. The Ute word for the creek itself was apparently
Parachute.
Tachush,
Hmm.
and according to the sources, that meant twins, probably referring to the two main forks of Parachute Creek.
Okay.
Early settlers, not familiar with the Ute language, they mispronounced Pachush, and it ended up sounding to them like parachute.
No way.
Yeah, and there's even a newspaper from 1910 mentioned in the sources that actually backs up this Ute etymology.
That's just a fascinating coincidence. Or maybe like a linguistic quirk of fate. The look of the land and a mispronounced indigenous word both pointing to the exact same, pretty unusual name.
It is quite a convergence, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe because the name was a bit unusual, or maybe for other reasons, the town actually tried to change its identity later on.
Right, I saw that. In 1904, it was renamed Grand Valley, incorporated under that name in 1908.
And the sources are pretty clear this wasn't random. It was a deliberate marketing move. They were trying to leverage the name recognition of, Grand Junction and the whole Grand Valley area to attract settlers, maybe tourists.
A real estate play, basically.
Totally. Strategic promotion.
Yeah.
But the research points out a major flaw. It
Right.
caused constant confusion.
Yeah.
People trying to get to Grand Junction, or just the main Grand River Valley, kept getting off the train at the wrong stop in Parachute, or rather Grand Valley as it was called then.
Oh, what a mess. That sounds like a nightmare for travelers.
Must have been. And clearly this attempt to kind of borrow another place's identity just didn't stick. The sources show the town went back to Parachute in 1980 and then officially again in 1986.
It really tells you something about needing your own distinct identity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But in those very early days, before the big energy pushes really started, Parachute's economy was, well, what you'd expect for the region, mostly farming and ranching.
Like nearby towns, Silt and Rifle.
Exactly. The valley climate, the terrain, it was well suited for raising cattle.
And that agricultural heritage is still there today, to some extent.
Yeah, Garfield County still has, I think the sources said, over 475,000 acres of farmland. A big focus is still on livestock.
Okay. But moving beyond that early farming economy, the period that truly defines Parachute's modern story is the oil shale era. And those intense, volatile boom and bust cycles.
This is where the story of the town's connection to its geology gets really dramatic.
Yeah. because this region is sitting on just an immense resource. Oil shale. It's literally rock with so much oil content that, as one source puts it, it actually burns.
And there's this great local legend captured in the sources about a pioneer named Mike Callahan back in 1882. Apparently, he built a fireplace out of this oil shale.
Oh no, don't tell me.
Yep, it burned his cabin down. A pretty dramatic way to discover the resource's potential.
Wow. Talk about learning the hard way.
Right. But, ironically, that experience reportedly made him an early advocate for developing oil shale. And Mount Callahan near Parachute is actually named after him. So it was a very early, very literal sign of the fire potential right beneath the surface.
And the scale of this resource, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. The Pecence Basin in western Colorado holds what? The world's largest estimated oil shale resources?
That's what the estimates say. Something like 1.525 trillion barrels of potentially recoverable oil. Trillion. It's a staggering number. However, and this is the crucial part the sources reveal, despite this vastness, the economic reality of getting oil from this rock, it's been tried for over a century.
Right.
Leading to repeated boom and bust periods in the Parachute area, including back in 1916, the 1920s, the 1940s. It's this persistent pattern. Hopeful speculation, then downturns.
So the rock was always there, the oil was in the rock, but making money from it was the constant hurdle.
Exactly that. The sources explain why profitability was so elusive. You need huge amounts of energy and water to process it. There were ongoing technological challenges, and crucially, global oil prices were always fluctuating.
Right. If oil prices dropped, extracting shale oil suddenly wasn't worth it.
Precisely. So the idea of oil shale as the fuel of the future, which was its branding for decades, it consistently remained just out of reach.
Yeah.
Economically, anyway.
This pattern really highlights a core insight from the sources, I think. Just having a resource isn't enough.
Yeah.
The economic viability of actually extracting and processing it is everything, and if that's unstable...
The community built around it will be too, absolutely.
And the most dramatic, the most intense of these cycles hit when? Late 70s, early 80s?
Yeah, that was the big one. Fueled by the high oil prices following the 1974 Arab oil embargo. Suddenly, oil shale looked economically feasible again. Maybe even necessary.
And this is when Exxon enters the picture in a massive way with their Colony project.
Yes. Exxon acquired properties, and in 1980, they launched this incredibly ambitious, multi-billion-dollar Colony oil shale project. Their plans were just immense.
Like what?
Envisioning huge strip mines, massive synthetic fuel plants. One projection mentioned was aiming for 15 million barrels per day eventually.
I saw in the sources the scale of their population projections was almost unbelievable. Local governments were trying to plan for, what, over 200,000 new residents by 2010?
And Exxon's internal numbers apparently went as high as 1.5 million.
Yeah.
The optimism was just completely off the charts.
Why?
It created what the sources call a feverish energy boom, a real free-for-all rush in the area. The whole community scrambled to build infrastructure.
New schools, paving streets.
Putting up town halls, hiring police, platting subdivisions. Parachute's population specifically quadrupled. Jumped from about 300 people to 1,200 between 1979 and 1982. Just 3 years.
And it wasn't only Exxon, right? Others were involved too.
No. Union Oil also started construction on their own big project on Parachute Creek in 1981, adding to that rapid growth pressure on schools, everything. Other companies like Teosco and Paraho had operations going too. It must have felt like this time, finally, the oil shale future was actually here to stay.
And then it wasn't.
And then, just like that, it was gone.
Which brings us to that defining moment for the region, still known locally, according to the sources, as Black Sunday, May 2nd, 1982.
Yeah. A day of just absolute shock for the community. Exxon unexpectedly announced they were closing the Colony project, effective immediately, laying off 2,500 workers overnight.
Overnight, it's pull the plug.
Just like that. Boom, just vaporized.
And the sources paint a really grim picture of the devastation that followed. Thousands lost their jobs instantly. Property values just plummeted. Hundreds of businesses went under.
And the exodus was huge. A combined 24,000 people reportedly left Garfield and neighboring Mesa counties between 1983 and 1985. That kind of population loss leaves deep, deep scars on a community.
It's that stark paradox again, isn't it? A community literally sitting on top of the world's largest estimated oil shale reserves.
Yeah.
Yet suffering this profound economic instability. The challenge wasn't the resource itself. It was that extracting it wasn't consistently profitable in the real world, especially when global oil prices shifted.
Exactly. And even after Exxon pulled out, The bust wasn't instantaneous for everyone. Union Oil kept its project going until 1991.
Right, but they eventually shut down too.
They did. Even though they had a federal contract guaranteeing them twice the market rate for the oil they produced, still wasn't enough, apparently.
Wow.
Shell tried to revive things again in the early 2000s, focusing more on sustainability this time. But the sources are pretty clear. Currently, there is effectively no oil shale industry in the state. That fuel of the future, well, it remains largely in the ground.
Okay, so oil shale is clearly the dominant narrative for the booms and busts. But the sources mention other resources and their impacts too, right? Like natural gas.
Definitely. The area between Rifle and Parachute is described as being dotted with natural gas wells.
And gas actually provided some economic cushion after the Union Oil shut down in '91, helped with population, schools.
It did. There was a pretty significant natural gas boom from about 2002 to 2009. And gas production remains a major part of Garfield County's overall economy today, even if it's not the same fever pitch.
The area also has soda ash deposits mentioned.
Right. And then there's that other really fascinating, almost sci-fi historical footnote, Project Rulison.
Yeah, I saw that. A federal experiment near the community of Rulison, just west of Parachute in the 1970s, involving 2 small underground nuclear explosions. That sounds wild.
It certainly does. The idea, as the sources outline it, was to use these nuclear blasts to fracture the deep rock layers,
Why?
hoping it would make it easier for natural gas to flow into wells. The thinking was it could reduce the need for conventional drilling, maybe lessen the surface environmental impact.
Which I guess on paper sounds like an innovative, if pretty extreme, technical approach.
Definitely extreme. But the sources note that while it was considered a technical success in terms of fracturing the rock, public concern over using nuclear explosions, maybe understandably, meant the idea wasn't pursued further. It stopped there.
That really highlights that recurring tension the sources bring up, doesn't it? Between the drive for resource extraction and the social or environmental costs.
Absolutely. That rapid growth from the oil shale boom wasn't just about new buildings. It brought real problems.
Yeah.
Severe housing shortages, things called man camps, sprung up.
Yeah.
And social issues like increased drug use, prostitution, and environmental worries were huge too, especially about Exxon's plans for those massive strip mines. They planned 6.
Ooh.
Larger than the world's largest at the time.
And Project Rulison getting halted by public apprehension is just another clear example of that friction point. The sources also specifically mention the canyon bottom of Parachute Creek being heavily impacted by gas well development over the years.
Right. Yeah. Accessing the wealth from these resources, even when the biggest oil shale projects ultimately failed, it came with significant tangible costs for the community and the landscape, social and environmental.
But one of the most striking legacies of that boom, even the bust that followed, is the impact on infrastructure. You see it very clearly with Battlement Mesa.
Oh, absolutely. Battlement Mesa is a fascinating case. It was literally founded by Exxon, built from scratch specifically to house the thousands of workers they expected for the Colony Project.
They built modular homes, apartments.
An activity center that's still there today. They basically built a whole town.
And then Black Sunday happened, Exxon left, and they sold it off.
Right. And it was transformed, became this large homeowners association, and eventually got marketed as a golf and retirement community.
Talk about adaptation.
It's a prime example. They took the physical remnants of a failed boom town, what one source calls the first-rate infrastructure installed by Exxon during the flush times, and repurposed it entirely for a completely different economic model: leisure, retirement.
That's a really pragmatic pivot. And that free-for-all rush to build during the boom also left behind other public facilities, right? Schools.
Yeah, schools were built early in the town's history, but a middle school, St. John Middle School, was specifically built during the Union Oil Project phase in 1981. And Parachute has its elementary, middle, and high schools serving the community today. Be Underwood Elementary, Grand Valley Middle and High.
And the water and sewer systems.
Put in during the boom, designed for a population of 10,000 people. Way more than the current population, which is somewhere between like 1,200 and 1,400.
Which I suppose could be a financial burden to maintain all that capacity.
Or could be a real asset. Right?
Yeah.
Gives them significant room for future growth without needing massive new infrastructure investment right away. It's kind of an unexpected legacy asset from the boom.
Transportation's also played a key role throughout Parachute's story.
For sure. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad arrived by 1887, which was huge for connecting the area, getting goods in and out. And today, Parachute sits right on Interstate 70.
With 2 interchanges. Makes it an easy place to pull off, as one source said.
Yeah, that ease of access is definitely a modern advantage. But the sources also point out it's kind of a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, while transportation brought connection and access, it also exposed Parachute more directly to external forces. Think about the transient workforce during the boom, easily coming and going. And the volatility of the wider economy during the busts hits harder when you're that connected.
Oh, makes sense.
And today, being right on I-70 is a major reason why Parachute functions significantly as a bedroom community.
Meaning lots of residents commute elsewhere for work.
Exactly. Many commute to jobs in other places, maybe down valley towards Glenwood Springs or even further, like the Aspen skiing economy, where wages might be higher but housing costs are prohibitive. Parachute offers more affordable housing.
So that provides a layer of stability, right? Tying them to different regional economies, not just local booms and busts.
It does offer some stability, but as the sources note, that bedroom community role creates its own challenges. There's a reliance on external economies rather than building strong local self-sufficiency.
Income earned elsewhere might not get spent locally, that leakage idea.
Right. It can limit the growth of local businesses, the diversity of the town's internal economy. It's a different kind of dependency than the resource boom-bust cycle. Maybe less volatile day to day, but it's still a form of dependency.
Okay, let's shift a bit to the social fabric. How has all this shaped the community itself? The sources showed just dramatic population swings tied directly to the economy.
Oh yeah, Table 1 in the sources illustrates it starkly. You see the population at maybe 268 in 1910, periods of decline, then these massive jumps, like quadrupling from 300 to 1,200 people in just 3 years, 1979 to 1982.
And then that devastating loss after Black Sunday, 24,000 people leaving Garfield and Mesa counties combined. Those kinds of rapid influxes and exoduses must put immense strain on a community's social structure.
They absolutely do. The sources describe significant social challenges during the boom's rapid influx. Housing shortages were acute, leading to those man camps. Locals complained about things like unattended kids, unsanitary conditions near the camps, increases in drug use, prostitution.
Property values skyrocketing probably helped some homeowners, but hurt renters.
Right, and people on fixed incomes. It creates winners and losers very quickly. And then the bust just reverses everything overnight. Job losses, property values crashing, businesses closing their doors.
The sources include descriptions of how tough that period after Black Sunday was, especially for kids. Parents suddenly out of work, friends moving away constantly.
One source describes it as incredibly depressing. And the idea that Black Sunday cast a pall over the community for a decade really highlights the long-term community scars left by that kind of economic trauma.
Yet, despite those severe impacts, the communities in the area, Parachute included, have shown remarkable resilience, haven't they?
They really have.
Yeah.
Rifle, nearby, kind of rebuilt its identity, focusing on tourism, retirement, and also being a bedroom community. Parachute 2 has adapted. It's leveraging its location, that existing infrastructure we talked about.
The sources mention a current growth rate of, 3–5% annually, so it seems the town is attracting new residents again.
Yeah, the focus now seems much more on attracting retirees, families looking for maybe a quieter, more affordable Colorado lifestyle. Battlement Mesa's transformation into that golf and retirement community is the prime example. It's a very pragmatic pivot, using the assets they have, location, climate, infrastructure for new purposes.
And community structures themselves played a role in holding things together through the tough times.
Seems like it. The Parachute Home Culture Club, founded by women way back in 1894, is highlighted. It provided an intellectual and social outlet, had a seriousness of purpose, acted as a barometer of the world for its members. Enduring local institutions like that can really anchor a community identity amidst all the economic churn.
And today, Parachute and Battlement Mesa even share a chamber of commerce. That suggests a more collaborative regional approach now.
Yeah, working together.
Just to add a bit more color, the sources threw in a few specific historical events and figures tied to Parachute. There's a classic Wild West element.
Right, the Kid Curry train robbery.
Yeah.
1905. Hardy Logan from the Hole in the Wall gang robbed a Denver and Rio Grande train right near Parachute, blew open the safe with dynamite.
A bit of outlaw lore. And then you contrast that with Project Rulison decades later using nuclear science for resource extraction.
It's quite the juxtaposition, isn't it? Reminds you the American West story isn't just one thing. It's frontier justice alongside cutting-edge, maybe controversial industrial science.
And the sources connect Parachute to significant intellectual achievement, too. It's the birthplace of Willard Libby.
The Nobel Prize winner, 1960, for developing radiocarbon dating, Quite a claim to fame for a small town.
Definitely. And then there's Mike Callahan again, the pioneer from the Rock That Burns story.
Right. His cabin burning down wasn't just an anecdote. It became this almost foundational narrative, directly linking the earliest settlers to the very resource that would define Parachute's volatile future. It's almost like the town's destiny was, in a way, written in its rocks from the very beginning.
And J.B. Hurlburt, the founder back in 1883, gets his mention too.
Okay, so revisiting the environmental aspect, which is woven through this whole story. The sources constantly underscore how the geology, the Book Cliffs, the Pheasants Basin, the Green River Formation that's been the primary economic engine, provided the oil shale and the natural gas.
But as we've discussed, the methods needed to get those resources out have had real environmental impacts. Oil shale processing needs tons of heat, energy, water. Environmental groups were deeply concerned about the scale of Exxon's planned strip mines.
And Project Rulison was stopped by public apprehension about the environmental and safety risks.
The sources also specifically note the Parachute Creek drainage has been heavily impacted by gas well development. There's this constant tension, isn't there, between the potential wealth from extraction and the desire to preserve the natural environment.
It's a really tough balance, especially because, as the sources point out, that same Parachute Creek drainage has significant ecological value on its own. It supports rare plants, these unique hanging gardens, important riparian vegetation.
So that ecological value stands in pretty stark contrast to the industrial impacts in the same area.
Exactly. It highlights that ongoing challenge. How do you pursue economic opportunity in a resource-rich area without sacrificing the unique, natural beauty that people also value?
And maybe that leads into a shift the sources identify, leveraging that natural beauty for a different kind of economy.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of the current strategy. The area offers great access to fishing Colorado River, Parachute Creek. It's known as a hunter's paradise.
Yeah.
Popular for outdoor activities like horseback riding, rafting, even ice climbing nearby. And Battlement Mesa's golf course fits into this picture too.
So this pivot towards outdoor recreation, attracting people who value that lifestyle,
Yeah.
sometimes called amenity migration, it's partly enabled by the infrastructure left from the boom, maybe.
Possibly, yeah. But it reflects the broader trend you see across the West, trying to move away from the volatility of extractive industries towards economies based more on services, leisure, quality of life. The town council is actively trying to capitalize on the region's abundance of natural resources for outdoor recreation, showcase that.
And the hope is that this path is potentially more stable, more sustainable in the long run than relying on volatile mineral wealth.
That definitely seems to be the thinking, yeah. Learning from the past.
So what does Parachute look like today based on the sources? The economy is more diversified than just oil shale, clearly, but that bedroom community role we discussed seems pretty dominant.
Right, many residents commuting, often to higher paying jobs down valley towards Aspen, partly because housing is just more affordable in Parachute.
Natural gas production is still very important to Garfield County's overall economy, though.
It is. But Parachute itself seems to be consciously working to reduce its direct dependence on extraction income. And it definitely benefits from retirees drawn by the climate, the quality of life, that access to recreation.
But that bedroom community status, while providing some stability from resource price swings, it has that downside we talked about.
Yeah, the sources highlight that paradox. Relying on external economies limits the town's ability to build a diverse internal economy, create enough good local jobs, keep spending within the community. It's not the sharp boom-bust cycle, but it's still a form of economic dependency.
Looking at the demographics, the town population is around 1,200 and 1,400, primarily white and Hispanic populations noted.
And while some inking figures are mentioned, the sources also flag ongoing challenges. An unemployment rate noted at 10.7%, a poverty rate at 18.1%.
Which seems high if the county overall has benefited from caste development.
That's a crucial point the sources seem to raise. There might be a disconnect. The wealth generated by regional resource extraction, like natural gas in Garfield County, isn't necessarily translating directly into broad prosperity for a significant chunk of Parachute's own residents. The benefits aren't fully trickling down evenly at the local level, it seems.
Which means the town faces clear ongoing challenges. They need to keep diversifying the local economy to create a strong and resilient tax base, basically, more stable funding for town services.
Right. Reduce the need for those really long super commutes. Attract local businesses and retail. The sources mentioned missing markets, like maybe a full-service grocery store, sporting goods, more restaurants, entertainment options, things that keep spending local and boost local tax revenue.
And housing affordability, that's a huge regional challenge across western Colorado, affecting Parachute, too.
For sure. But what's really promising, I think, is how proactive the sources show Parachute being now. They seem very strategic in their community development efforts, clearly trying to learn from that past volatility.
Absolutely. They're actively investing in their business districts, looking for public-private investment partnerships. Recent initiatives mentioned include rewriting the land use code to make permitting easier, digitizing processes, even waiving certain fees to encourage development. They have a downtown development plan in place.
They're consciously working to enhance those outdoor recreation opportunities we talked about, collaborating with Battlement Mesa through the shared chamber. And there's a regional group, the Colorado River Valley Economic Development Partnership, helping advance priorities like workforce development.
That whole list of deliberate actions really demonstrates a shift, doesn't it? Towards resilient governance, community-led development, driven by the need to build a more stable future after experiencing such intense ups and downs. They're not just reacting anymore. They seem to be actively planning.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture, what does it all mean? The story of Parachute, Colorado, it's pieced together from your sources. It's just a really powerful case study in adaptation and resilience, profoundly shaped by those intense boom and bust cycles that are so characteristic of the American West.
Yeah, from its origins in Ute history and early settlement, through those incredibly dramatic, often really painful swings, driven by the, let's say, volatile promise of oil shale, culminating in that defining moment of Black Sunday. Parachute has somehow consistently found ways to endure and to transform itself.
And the key insights you pull from this deep dive really underscore the fundamental instability of relying too heavily on just one extractive industry, especially one as prone to volatility as oil shale proved to be. The town's whole journey, including trying to change its name, those pragmatic pivots from being an energy hub to a bedroom community and retirement spot, it just highlights the absolute critical importance of diversifying the economy and having flexible, adaptive planning.
And the proactive steps the community is taking today really stand out. Focusing on attracting diverse businesses, consciously trying to improve the quality of life, strategically leveraging its natural beauty for recreation. It shows a clear commitment to building a more sustainable, more resilient future, and one that's explicitly informed by the hard lessons learned from its history.
Ultimately, I think Parachute's experience is a testament to the spirit of a community that's faced profound economic and social upheaval, but keeps seeking new paths forward, working with the landscape and the resources that have both, blessed and challenged it so intensely.
What's so fascinating here is how a town's geography and geology can kind of lay out certain economic possibilities or dependencies. But at the end of the day, it's the choices and the resilience of its people that determine its capacity for transformation and survival.
Which really leads to an important question for you, the listener, to consider. Parachute's specific journey through boom and bust is tied to oil shale and natural gas. But what does its experience tell us about the broader challenges and maybe the opportunities facing any community today that finds itself heavily reliant on external economic forces, or maybe on a single volatile industry? Something to think about.